We're recording, I guess. Okay, good. So hi, I'm Randy Jack Voting. I am also on the committee for Agile Rhode Island. So I want to welcome you again. It's great. We have 37, which is a great, at least right now, participants, and it's just great. Again, check out the chat either after the talk is done. There's a lot of great links in there, including our social media links. I do have an open position. It's not an agile position. So if you happen to know anyone that's a healthcare interface analyst, I'm looking for that here in Rhode Island. So not agile related, but you never know. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Stephen. And Stephen, please, I apologize in advance if I don't say your last name, but I'm going to say Voyles.
Voyles, yes.
Voyles. Okay. We weren't sure. we were debating before, but I guess. So Stephen is a Chief Enablement Officer at the 334 Group. He's been helping organizations transition to agile ways of working for nearly 20 years, and he brings a wealth of experience from multiple industries to the way he thinks about agile. So looking forward to hearing him speak, and so I'm going to turn it over to him, and make sure if you have questions during the presentation to type them in the chat. Stephen, I'll leave it to you now.
All right, thanks for that great introduction, Randy. I appreciate it. As Randy said, I'll just get right into it. Let me share my screen here. So I'm the Chief Enablement Officer for the 334 Group. So we focus primarily on agile transformation, executive coaching, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about, I know a topic that a lot of you are interested in, apparently, this idea that we've got these command and control leaders in our organizations, and they're going to need some help dealing with the transformation to agile ways of working. And so I know that that's a big topic right now that a lot of people are focused on, and we'll talk about why that is and how we help some of those people. So again, just a little bit about me. As Randy said, I've been working with Agile teams for about 20 years, working on Agile transformations, typically leading large enterprise transformations or advising the leaders that are leading those transformations. I got a list here of some of the companies that I've worked with just for reference. And then also my wife, my two beautiful boys, just to give you a little background on me. So let's talk about why change is so hard, especially when we talk about agile adoption. So I want to start off by talking about, this is the innovation adoption lifecycle. So I'm sure you guys have seen this before. This talks a little bit about like anytime there's a new technology, all those new technologies go through these stages of adoption, right? And so typically we start off with the initial innovators and early adopters, and those people are really quick to adopt new technologies and new innovations, right? And then eventually everybody comes along, and eventually we get into this late majority and this laggard stage. So, the Agile Manifesto for software development was written about 20 years ago, around 2000, 2001. I feel like we've gone through the innovation stage and the early adopter stage. So, I kind of want to, engage the rest of you guys. Where do you guys think we're at in terms of the adoption lifecycle? So, I do see agile ways of working as an innovation, right? It's an innovation and a change in the way that we do work in large corporations. But where do you guys think we're at after 20 years?
I'd say it's still early majority.
Okay.
Early adopters.
Okay.
You mean team agility or enterprise agility, business agility?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I'm just thinking about in terms of people believing that agile practices are the best way to get work done, right? And all those things I think fit into that category. But in terms of adapting from a command and control mindset to an agile, self-managing teams, giving people autonomy, that type of mindset, where do you think we are?
I'd say early adopters too.
I would agree with that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we're still early in the curve. Not everybody has caught on. But I think we are kind of in that early majority, maybe late majority stage. And so I think when we talk about innovators and early adopters, those are people who are quick to latch on to new technologies or new innovations or new ideas. And so I think we've gotten to a stage where, all of the people for which agile practices and agile ways of working really resonates, and it just clicks really easily for people. Most of those people have already decided, agile is the thing for me. Now, some of those people might be working in organizations that aren't completely aligned with those principles and those values. But most of the people, we're not at a stage where there are people that haven't heard of it before, right? We're not at a stage where nobody's experienced it, or, you've worked in a company that's never heard of Agile before, for the most part. So the people that really haven't come on board yet, the people that we're still working to convince, are some of the people that just aren't going to be convinced very easily. And so I think that's one of the important things to understand about trying to work with command and control leaders, is they're in this group where, it's not that they haven't heard about agile practices or that they haven't heard about agile ways of working. It's just that it doesn't make sense to them, right? They're not in that early adopter or innovator stage in terms of this technology, right? And so I think what we have to understand, the first step to helping people change is to understand where they're at. And so what I think is really important here to understand is the concept of cognitive dissonance. Now, so let me ask you guys, who knows what this means? Who knows what cognitive dissonance is?
We have a shy group today. I'll try.
Okay, that's fine.
Conflicting ideas.
Feel free to drop something.
So
in.
I'll use my, my consultant powers of awkward silence, just to wait.
Would it be conflicting ideas?
Yeah. So it's this discomfort that humans feel when you try to hold two different conflicting ideas in your head at the same time, right? So some of you may be experiencing this now. I know I am. So this is one that, it's the new year. We're all trying to, maybe trying to change some of the things about the way that we live with our New Year's resolutions. And so, while I do want to maintain a healthy weight and I want to be healthy, at the same time, I like pie. And so my brain is going to struggle with that. And I'm going to have a hard time meshing those two ideas together, because I can't have both of those things at the same time, right? And so I'm going to have to use some kind of coping strategies in order to make those things make sense and create an equilibrium in my brain. It's just how humans are wired. And so this is the kind of thing that we're inducing when we try to talk to people about Agile who don't automatically believe that this is the right way to do things, right? And so typical coping strategies that people use when they are trying to resolve cognitive dissonance is they just straight change their behavior, right? They stop doing the thing that's causing the dissonance for them, right? So in this case, I'd either give up eating pie or I'd give up on being healthy, right? That's really hard to do. And a lot of times in Agile transformations, that's what we're asking people to do, is just to completely change behavior. And so I think we need to have a realization of just how difficult that is for people to do, and a realization that there are other coping strategies that we can leverage, that we can help them with to make that cognitive dissonance go away and to help them hold these ideas in their head. And so another one that people try to do is they just justify their behavior, right? Well, I'm not doing it all the time, and so that's okay. Or they'll try to change and add some new behavior that allows them to feel good about what they're doing, right? Or they'll just completely ignore the new information, right? That's not true. And so this is the kind of thing that we're asking people to hold in their heads, right? So somebody who's had a career for 20, 30, 40 years, that's in a leadership position now, that has always been able to find success by having detailed plans and micromanaging and not allowing a lot of autonomy on their teams. When we come to them with this idea that in order to be successful, we have to have flexibility in our planning, and we have to give teams the room and the space that they need to do their work, that creates this kind of cognitive dissonance in them, right? And so asking them to let go of that control and those techniques and strategies that have worked well for them in the past, again, that initial coping strategy of just completely changing the behavior, that's very difficult for people to do, right? So how many of you have leaders in your organization that the second they heard about Agile practices or new Agile ways of working, they said, you know what, that's the right thing for me, and I'm going to do a complete 180 on the way that I lead and run the organization because I believe in this thing. Anybody experience that? Okay, I see a couple of heads nodding yes. Do you want to tell us that story?
I think I've signed NDAs about those companies.
All right, so it does happen, but doing a complete 180 and changing the way that you manage or that you lead an organization and all of the things that have made you successful is very difficult for people to do. Now let's talk about some of the other coping strategies that you've probably seen in your organizations. So justifying the behavior, saying, well, you're telling me that all of these things that I'm doing are not the best way to lead, but it's been successful so far and I've gotten promoted. I'm in a leadership position because of it. So why should I change? Has anybody heard anybody say anything like that in your organization? And can you talk about it at all?
I haven't heard anybody say it, but their
Okay.
actions speak louder than words.
Right,
Keep sending the reports that detail everything, but we're going to work in a totally different way. It's
Right.
like, what?
Right.
Why?
Yeah, we call that Agile where I work, right? And it's a little bit of, we're going to do it a new way, but it's still show the RAG status and do this and do that the old way.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And I think that's, resolving with new behavior, adding new behavior, right? So I hear a lot of that where we're still continuing to do all the upfront planning. We're still continuing to report progress the same way. But now we're just executing in small increments, right? All those small increments have been mapped out for months at a time, right? And we know exactly what we're planning on doing. And we're going to measure you on whether or not you did what we thought you were going to do versus the value that you created or the learnings that you've accomplished, right? So we'll just add in this new behavior, and that makes us feel like we're doing the new thing that people are telling us is the best thing to do, when really it's not, right? How about number 4? I see a lot of this too, ignore or deny the dissonant information, right? So before, the example with the pie, I said, well, I could just pretend that pie is healthy, right? I can do that, and that'll make me feel a lot better. So do you guys see any of that in some of the organizations that you're working with where people just say, well, that's great, and I see all this evidence that these new ways of working are working for other people, but that's not going to work here for this reason or that reason?
There are some people who perceive their jobs as entirely doing detailed upfront planning, and they're concerned about, will their roles be?
Yeah, so that's the other part of this too, right? So a lot of the things that we're asking people to change about the way that they're working is very threatening, right? And so we have to have a realization that we are asking people to fundamentally change some of their core beliefs and some of the things that make them who they are and the role that they identify with in the organization. And so we need to address that if we expect them to actually adopt these new ways of working that we want them to, right?
In my experience, management's very receptive to the notion of Agile. I don't really truly think they understand what that entails. Like changing culture without changing structure and how we process things is difficult. I work in pharma, so it's doubly difficult because we're dealing with bench scientists. But that's been my experience. They like the idea. They use the words. You have the company meetings, they throw it out there as if it's just a word, but I don't think they truly understand what is needed and the discipline and the commitment, most importantly, that's required.
All right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of that where we're experiencing where people are very receptive to the idea of the benefits of the kinds of things that we're telling them they'll be able to do with Agile. But not so receptive when it actually starts to affect them, right? When they actually have to change. And so we need to approach that with empathy, and we need to understand that that the things that we're asking people to do are going to make them uncomfortable. All right, so one of the ways that we can really look at this is trying to find out, what's in it for that person, right? So coming at the problem with the perspective of empathy and understanding where they're coming from and what are the threats and the cognitive dissonance that they feel and the changes that we're asking them to make, right? And so one of the ways that I've really been successful with in doing that is understanding the organization, right? And finding paths of least resistance. And I know that, this talk is mainly about how taking individual leaders that may be command and control leaders and helping them to make the change. But I think before you do that, it's really important to know that we want to find where those paths of least resistance are, because you're not going to be able to influence all of the leaders in your organization. And the change isn't going to be effective unless you have leadership support. And so it's really important to find where are the levers that you can pull, where are the places of influence that are the most important to enacting change in your organization. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So I want to share this story. So this is, a very simplified org chart of an organization that I worked with. I've stripped out all the details and names, and these are fake pictures, right, to protect the innocent. But we were working with the CIO of this organization. It was an insurance company, financial institution, heavily regulated, right? And the CIO, though, was one of the biggest champions of Agile change, along with the chief marketing officer in the organization. So these were the two that brought us in, right? But it turned out that the CEO and several other members of the leadership team had worked previously with the director of the PMO. And so she was able to have tremendous influence over some of the decisions that were made at that senior leadership team level. And we found that time and again, she wasn't necessarily a fan of Agile, and we weren't really focusing our efforts in trying to win her over at the beginning of the transformation. But we found during that time that she was really the person that we needed to influence the most. Even though she reported to the CIO technically, there were a lot of times when she was able to go back and reverse decisions that he had made through the connections and relationships that she had in the organization. So I think, yes, it's important for us to understand how to change behavior and how to influence people, but also we want to make sure that we're influencing the right and
the folks who aren't talking, can you mute? Barbara, do you have the ability to mute people? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sue. All right, so then, once we've identified where the paths of least resistance and where are the places that we really need to influence the most, what we want to do then is move on to some of the tools, and I'll talk about some of the things that we do. You guys have probably seen some of these things in reference to design thinking or product development. And I think that's one fundamental shift that we need to make as Agilists, right? So I see a lot of times where those people that are leading transformations or Agile coaches, like myself, are working with leaders in the organization, and we're just throwing all the Agile terms and terminology and practices at them, right? And then when they don't understand it, or when it doesn't completely click for them, the attitude is, they just don't understand it, right? And so I think what we have to remember is we're not, as leaders of transformation, leaders of change, your job is not to just educate people on what needs to be done, but to sell them on it, right? And so I think leaning a lot on what we know about product development and design thinking from an Agile perspective is really important in influencing those people, right? We need to look at these transformations as business agility as our product, and leaders in the organization are customers that we want to turn into raving fans, right? And we want them to really internalize the belief that this is the right thing to do. And so let's talk about some of those tools that you can use to do that. So this is a tool that I actually use a lot. It's from Strategizer. If you guys haven't been out there, strategizer.com has a great set of tools for design thinking. And this is their culture map. So who's seen this before or worked with any of Strategizer's tools and is familiar with any of this? All right, so if you haven't worked with any of their tools, again, they have a lot of great stuff out there. Go register out at their site. But this culture map is a great way, and I'll provide a link in the chat at the end of the session to a blog post they have out there about how to use this. Because it's not really something we want to get into on this. Sorry, for those of you that aren't, if you have a question, that's great. But yeah, please mute. Sorry. Yeah, so this culture map is from Strategizer, and it's a great way to understand the culture of your organization. So one thing that I think is important to talk about here is it's really tempting, especially if you're working within an organization that you've been in for a very long time. It's tempting to think that you know the culture of the organization and you know what drives people internally, and you probably have a good sense of it, right? But I think it's important, first of all, to go through this exercise of just writing those things down. I think you'll find that you'll uncover some things that you didn't realize, especially if you're working with a cross-functional team, right? And so all of you that are trying to drive agile transformation in your organizations, hopefully you're working with a cross-functional team, so it's not just the project management office or IT. You've got people from marketing and HR and finance on your transformation team. And those people are going to have different perspectives and different insights into the organization than you do. And so it's really important to go through this exercise to understand what are the drivers at a macro scale in the organization, and what are people rewarded for, what's incentivized, and what kind of behaviors are being incentivized throughout the organization. And so once you find out what works here, start thinking about how you can leverage that in terms of agile transformation, and what are the things, the areas where there's overlap between the things that agile provides for people and the things that drive the organization, the things that have been successful in motivating individuals within the organization before, right? Look at change efforts and initiatives that have happened before. So you've probably had times where you've had to move to a new maybe payroll system, or you've changed the way that you do benefits, or any of those kind of really large changes. Particularly the folks on your transformation team that are from HR are really helpful here in understanding what are the levers that they've been able to pull culturally in order to make big changes happen. So if you don't have somebody from HR, somebody from sales and marketing, right, on your transformation team, that's something that you want to be able to leverage. And those are the experts in these kinds of big cultural changes and how to make those happen and how to sell people on these ideas. And so definitely, if you're not leveraging that part of your organization, find some people that are fans of what you're trying to do and try to bring them on board to your transformation team. So another great tool that I like to use is this idea of an empathy map. Who's used empathy maps before, and from an agile product development standpoint? I know somebody's done this. All right, I'm getting a couple of thumbs up. All right, so empathy maps are a way to map out and visualize basically what are the drivers of individuals in your organization. So now we've identified the cultural drivers in the organization at a macro level. We've identified the leaders in the organization that are our best leverage points to try to create change. And so now what we want to do is we want to understand what drives those people as individuals. And so empathy maps, in conjunction with a technique called empathy interviews, is a really great way to visualize that. And so this is where you're gonna sit down and talk with this person. And it can either be a formal empathy interview, and we'll talk about what those look like in a second, Or this can just be through informal conversations, right? The best way to understand what drives somebody is to treat them like a person, right? And actually have conversations with them and get to know them and build rapport. And as you do that, as you have interactions with that person, whether it's in just regular meetings that you have, or whether you take them to coffee every now and then, right? If you can get that kind of time with some of the leaders in your organization, use the information that you understand about them, and as a team in your transformation team, combine all the information that you know about these people and create this map of their personality, right? What drives them, what keeps them up at night, what are the reactions that they're having, or the parts of Agile ways of working that they're challenging that just doesn't quite seem to make sense for them, and catalog those, right? And you're going to leverage those to try to figure out what are the things, what are the parts of Agile transformation or the Agile practices or the parts of Agile philosophy that are going to really resonate with that person. And that's what you want to focus on when you're working with them. So I said, general conversations is a great way to get an understanding for these people's personality and what drives them and what motivates them. But you can also do formal empathy interviews, especially if you're doing this as part of a formal change process, right? So whenever we go in to work with customers, everybody knows that's what we're there for, right? We're there to help with Agile transformation. And so that's an opportunity for us to do actual formal empathy interviews where we can ask questions about the individuals and about what drives them. What are their goals for the year, right? So these are some of the questions, the types of questions that we ask, right? So we want to find out what are the kinds of things that drive them, what are their goals for the year, how are they incentivized. It's really important to try to ask questions. So this idea of open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, which are questions to which, I can just say yes or no, right? So, are you excited about Agile practices coming to our organization, right? It's really easy for me to just say no, and that doesn't give you a lot of information. Or even if I say yes, that's not really helpful, right? So ask people, how does it make you feel when you hear that we might be changing the way that we're working, right? And then just kind of let them talk. And that's going to help you fill out that empathy map, but it's also going to give you lots of detail around what the real sentiment is behind the change that you're trying to invoke in the organization, and where are the places that people are finding the most friction between what you're doing now and what you're trying to move the organization to, right? And so those are the things you're going to want to keep in mind as you craft your messaging and you decide what elements of agility you want to bring in to the organization first. And once you understand the organizational drivers, I'm assuming most of you, as if you're on this webinar, you're probably very interested in Agile practices and you're probably very well versed in them for the most part. So take the information that you know about what's good and what's challenging about Agile, combine that with what you've learned about the organizational drivers through that culture map exercise, through empathy interviews and empathy maps. Take those leaders that you want to influence the most and overlay that with the individual drivers and motivations of those people, and try to find what are the places where all of that kind of connects, right? And those are the places in your organization where you're going to be able to be most successful with change. So another, really popular method of trying to transform organizations right now is this idea of, let's just roll in with a framework and we'll do this big bang transformation, and we'll train everybody on the new way to do things, and then they'll just do it, right? If your organization hasn't already really embraced Agile ways of working, in my experience, those big bang transformations don't work. If you are currently still doing things in a more of a command and control or waterfall type environment, it's because there's resistance. Again, Agile's been around for 20 years. It's not new to anybody. If you haven't latched onto it as an organization yet, there's probably resistance inside of your organization, which means the idea of flipping an organization over and having them do a complete 180 on the way that they operate overnight or within a few months or within a year is probably not as feasible as we might sometimes be led to believe, right? And so what we really want to do is find small incremental changes that we can use to nudge the organization in the direction that we want it to go. And the way that you're going to be the most successful in doing that is nudging on the places where these three things overlap, right? What are the things that provide the most benefit combined with the things that the organization pays attention to and the things that the individuals you're trying to influence value, right? And then once you do that, it's important to understand that this is going to be a long, difficult change for a lot of these people. So the focus on small incremental changes, understanding that it's going to take a long time, and making sure that you're providing the coaching support to those individuals that you're trying to get to change, so that they don't feel threatened and so that they see the benefits of what you're trying to help them to do in their own lives, and the way that's going to influence their ability to be successful in the organization, even though it might be different than what they're used to doing. And helping them to understand that this is going to help them to create more success for themselves and for the organization. And that's going to take a while, and it's going to be a slow incremental change. So I think that's all I've got for content. What questions do you guys have? I know I probably went through that pretty quickly. What questions do we have?
I personally have never built a culture map before. Kind of what's the process, or like how do you start with even building something like that?
Yeah, let me, I'll throw a link into the article from Strategizer, but I think essentially the general framework around that is to get your team together, right? You want a good cross-functional or cross-sectional representation of the organization. And there's a series of questions that you're going to ask to fill that out, that are going to talk about, what are the things that drive the organization? What are the things we've seen work before? What are our beliefs? You're going to look at your values and your mission statement. A lot of times for organizations, honestly, those things are pretty broad, and they don't necessarily match up to the behaviors that you guys are probably going to see as individuals within the organization. But they're also great places to look to see, are these really the things that we believe? And so you're going to have a discussion about those things, and you're going to fill out that culture map. And at the end of it, you should have a pretty good picture of what are the real values and beliefs in the organization, and what actually drives people, and what's actually incentivized and rewarded within that organization. I know it's not a lot of detail. I want to be more helpful, but that's probably like a whole hour on it, just on itself.
No, it's helpful. I'll look forward to seeing the link afterwards.
Yeah, I'll share the link, and then I've shared my contact information here as well. All of you, some of these questions we're probably not going to go terribly deep on, but please feel free to reach out to me individually, and we could spend some more time on it.
So once you get that culture map, does that lead to a change in the culture itself, or really figure out how to apply Agile to make that culture successful?
Yeah, so the culture map in this context, at least, what I'm really asking you guys to do is to use that just to have an understanding of the culture, so that you can use that understanding to influence how you try to make the change, right? So for instance, in an organization where you really value, so there's a nonprofit organization that I've worked with before, that's a children's hospital, right? And within that culture, right, financial goals and revenue targets or donation targets are really important to them. But what really drives everybody in that organization is the mission, right? Helping kids that are in the hospital, right? And so when we talk about messaging around the benefits of agility in that organization, what we're going to focus on is how do these new practices allow the organization to better serve the patients? And we're going to not talk as much about financial incentives or having a better process or some of the other things that are benefits of agility, but just won't resonate with those people, right? Versus when I'm talking to a bank or an insurance company, the financial metrics are really a huge focus. Some of the things that where we talk about respect for people or autonomy of teams, those are important. And I'm not saying that we don't stress those to those organizations, but it's not the main focal point for why we're trying to to tell them that this change is going to benefit them, right? Some of those things are things we kind of sneak in right after we've convinced them that this is the right thing to do for the organization based on what they believe. And so that culture map is really there to just inform your decision about which parts of agility and agile practices you want to highlight and which parts you want to kind of let just happen on their own.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Sure.
Steve, have you gone into companies where they kind of felt that they were doing agile, they knew what it was, they broke into small teams, and then at some point, whether somebody does an assessment or whatever happens, they realize they could be doing much more, working differently? And then, how have you approached that if you've worked with people like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, most of the time when I'm brought into an organization, in the last probably 6 or 7 years, there's some version of Agile there, right? And they often believe, we're doing pretty well, and that's why I'm there, so to help them understand if there's anything they could be doing better. I think my approach there is it's really similar to I think the context here that I've been talking about is when you're trying to start or drive a new agile transformation. I think the approach is the same in organizations that maybe have a belief that there's some agility already present in the organization. And I would say in my experience, I think sometimes those organizations are even more challenging, right? Because there's this belief that we've already transformed and we're doing things the right way. And the right way is subjective. So, I don't want to give you the impression our approach is not a dogmatic, like we know how to do Agile and this is exactly how you should be doing it. But I will tell you that, planning a 3-year project and breaking that into 2-week increments and setting those as milestones is probably not it, right? And we see a lot of that kind of stuff. And so this approach of understanding the organization, understanding the people that are really influencing how things get done around the organization, and then understanding what makes those people tick, it's the same thing, right? Except now we've got this additional challenge of, well, we've already made this big change and we thought that was over. And now you're telling us that we have to change even more. And so you just have to really focus in on what are the areas that are going to provide the most benefit for the organization, and just focus on those changes without making it this huge, overwhelming, we need to completely upend everything we do as an organization. Sorry, I know that was kind of long-winded. I hope that answered your question, Doug.
Yeah. And I've been through some of the same experience. I'm just, was curious on your take, and it is a long process. So
yeah, it takes a long time.
Yeah. Sure.
Steve, you've got a question in the chat.
Okay.
From Dana. I can read it for her or him. What are your thoughts on coaching through doing versus telling, and then showing or showcasing small successes throughout the organization? For example, helping a product owner write some of their stories to get them going versus just telling them how to do it. Their experience has been that consultants who tell rather than actively show don't get the traction, and that's when the promised transformation starts to die.
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is right there in the question, right? So yes, absolutely. You want help from people who are going to get in and get their hands dirty, especially now, right? Again, we are at a stage where most of the people who are going to go to a 2-day training class and they're going to hear this is a good way to do things, and that's going to click for them and they're going to take off and run with it. Those people are already doing that stuff. We're not helping them anymore, right? And so the people who we're helping now do need a lot more individual help, holding their hand through some of the process and giving them examples. And so one of the things that we do actually is trying to embed people in different roles. And anytime we can find, an opportunity to have somebody as a, management of a development team, or, somebody that's actually in that role, we try to do that, because allowing people to be on the ground full time, living, breathing the Agile principles and showing people how that benefits the organization really is the best way to do it, right? the kind of the flip side of that is that gets really expensive, right? Not that, you know, we as consultants are terribly expensive. I know we get a bad rap for that. But it's just, you know, to have somebody there on the ground 40 hours a week is the big ask of your organization. And so, you know, unfortunately, we don't always get to do that as much as we like. But yeah, absolutely. The more we can give people very directed coaching in the things that we're asking them to do versus this broad advice that they then have to learn how to apply themselves, that does get much better results. We have to get the level of commitment from the organization that we need to be able to do that. Did I miss anything else in the chat?
I think some thank yous, but no question. So have you had people, sorry, I'll let other people speak. Rob, if you want to speak out loud, your question.
Sorry, sure. I just typed this into the chat. I'll just read what I wrote. First, based on my experience from making the transitions, helping organizations to make that transition from waterfall to agile, there is such a need for what you're talking about here, because it's such a significant change in so many different dimensions for organizations. That's been my experience. My question is, I'm assuming that you've done this in non-agile situations. Is there something about agile transformations that you've observed that is unexpected and surprising? Like you go, every time you do this, you go, there's that thing again that we you know, always surprises me every time we do one of these. So anything like that?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know that I've thought about that. I mean, there's always surprises. I don't know that it's consistently the same. I think the biggest thing is, you know, I think, and I'm going to beat up a little bit on us as consultants and agile coaches, but I think we are, you know, I talk about this a lot, but we are at this divide where there's a huge group of people that are really believe in these new ways of working. And there's another group of people that just aren't quite there yet. And I think the thing that consistently surprises me the most is where the group of people that are supposed to be the support system and the coaches and the people that are facilitating change in the organization, how little empathy they have for the idea that other people can't see things the way that they do. And so that's why I really push this idea of like, just step back and try to see things from the other person's perspective, because this idea that it's us versus them and they just don't get it. I mean, while I understand it, I think it's just not very productive. And so I think I'm always very surprised at the idea that people who are really great coaches and are really great one-on-one with people sometimes get incredibly frustrated. I'm guilty of it too, right? When people don't immediately see things the way that they do. So just remember that, you know, they're people too. They're trying their best. They just don't see the world the way that you do, right?
I had a question on, is there a suggestion or a rule of thumb, so to speak, around the mix of bringing in consultants versus upskilling the folks who are already there when trying to do a transformation?
Yeah, I think, you know, and I'm gonna give this standard consultant answer too. It depends. So there's a couple of factors there though that I would look at. Is I think in terms of having sustainable, consistent change in the organization, it is much more effective to take people who already have a presence in the organization, understand the organization, and try to help them to become the agents of change in the organization, right? That is a long, slow process. And so if you're in an organization where if we don't change the way that we work in the next 8 months and really start to become customer centric and think differently about our industry, we're probably not going to be in business anymore. That might not be the best approach in the short term, right? It might be better just to bring in a bunch of people that know what they're doing and can really hit the ground running and get you changed quickly. However, if you don't pay attention to upskilling the people that are there and making sure that they really understand and internalize these practices, the second those consultants leave, all that stuff's going to fall apart, because people will feel pressure in the organization. They're going to revert to what they know and what they're comfortable with. And if you haven't done your job as a coach to make sure that they have internalized the things that you've been telling them, then it's not going to stick around. And so that's why those let's throw 20 consultants in there, and let's drive the organization ourselves and drive the change ourselves is not the approach that we take, because we want long-term sustainable change. And so yes, we will sometimes have people embedded in the organization for long periods of time, but their job there is to really set an example and develop the other people that are full-time employees of the organization into people that can replace us, right? And so we're constantly trying to work ourselves out of a job. So anyway, sorry, that turned into a sales pitch, but what I mean is that's really the best way to do it, right? Is for whoever is helping you, and bringing in experts who have been through these kinds of changes before is really effective, but only if those experts are turning you into an expert rather than just telling you what to do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And it also gives visibility into the empathy question that you brought up earlier, because it's very hard for people who come in from the outside to be empathetic with those people who've maybe never worked anywhere else before.
Right.
Thank you.
Good point.
Yeah,
Steve, a few minutes ago, you mentioned that, when you're trying to do something better, and that better was subjective. So in that context, what's your opinion, reaction when folks at a transformation present best practices? My stance is that every organization, although there might be similarities, I mean, every company has people, has systems, has to have processes. So that aside, every company has sort of like a different DNA. So presenting best practices sometimes is counterintuitive to what we're trying to do. Any thoughts, recommendations on that?
Yeah, so what I like to say is there are no best practices. I think that term, while it's good, it's well intentioned, I think it invokes this sense that there are a set of practices, and those are the best ones for everybody, and we should do all those, which is that's just overlaying this whole paradigm that we had before of this is the standard operating procedure, and this is the PMBOK, and we should do everything in the way that it's written out here. When what we're really trying to do is create environments where we're constantly learning new ways to do things or better ways to do things. And so I think the term best practices, when used in that context, is not great. But what I do like to say is there are lots of practices that tend to be really good in most contexts. And so that doesn't mean you can just apply them blanket across any environment. But there are patterns that we've seen over the last 2 decades working with lots of organizations that tend to work well. And so that's when you have a particular problem in a particular context, that's probably the first solution we want to try, at least. But we shouldn't go into that assuming that it's going to work. What we should do is say, let's set up a test and let's set up an experiment around what happens to this challenge that we're seeing when we apply this solution to it. And then after we get all that data, let's decide if it's something we want to continue doing.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for your question.
I see some variations in there of good practices and leading practices.
Proven experiments. All good ideas.
I'm just bringing up the chat now. Sorry, it's way too much for me to. I can't watch the chat and the video, and I'm not the multitasker that I know a lot of you are. I just can't do it.
Is anybody
this is
really
great.
a good multitasker?
Well, that's a whole other topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm especially bad at it. I'll just say that. So, you know, so that's a great example, right? So that's one of the things I always try to think about when I think about why do I believe the things that I believe, and why is Agile so intuitive to me, right? One of the things is, you know, we talk a lot about focus and not having too many things going on at once. I feel really comfortable in that space. Some people, though, feel really comfortable in a space where they have 30 things going on and it makes them feel good and busy. And so we have to remember that maybe we have a lot of data around why that's not a great thing to do. But that doesn't help someone who, you know, that way of working makes them feel really comfortable. We've got to find another way to work with them. Anyway.
And it sounds like what we were talking about with the empathy, understanding where people are coming from. You know, if they've been rewarded for, you know, juggling 6 things at once, and they think, you know, it's literally in the definition of their job description, they're going to continue doing it. And, you know, just one outside person telling them to do it differently and saying that they're going to be more productive may not make the difference.
Right. It's like, what? You're only assigned to 2 projects? Oh, you better hope we're not laying off soon, like, because you better get on some more projects.
Right.
Isn't that a fundamental culture problem with the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was directly criticized for trying to work my way out of a job when I was working on an agile transformation. People were like, "Why are you teaching us how to do it ourselves?" I'm like, because I'm not going to be here forever, and you're supposed to be self-organizing and fully functional, and, you know, have redundancy and be successful. But, you know, a lot of those people had worked at that same company in one place for so long that they didn't understand, like, moving, you know, to different jobs. I grew up, my dad was in the Navy, changed jobs every 2 to 3 years. He always, I mean, it was like in his job description to work his way out of a job and train the next person.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was kind of built into my way of thinking, and Agile fits with that. But so many people have worked in the same place for a long time, you know, they're building these silos and job security, and it's a difficult change. They don't relate to it.
Yep.
Hey, Steve, had a question. So I know you had like the culture map. Do you have any other canvases or tools for capturing what the real culture is? So again, what people get recognized, rewarded, what you can speak about, kind of the Edward Schein techniques, so you can bring that back to the C-level to know what they've got to overcome?
Yeah, so that one is my go-to. But yeah, I think if there's other ones that you know about, let's hear about those.
No, I was looking for what you got.
Yeah, I think, you know, understanding culture is a really difficult thing to do. And so, yeah, that's one of the areas I'm always looking for some inspiration. I don't think that I've quite gotten that one completely figured out yet, but yeah, usually just talking to the people that have been there for a long time tells me a lot. That's just my way to get it down on paper.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's and you know, within these transformations, it's really changing from something else. You know, what do they get recognized? What are the barriers, and how can you enlist the, you know, your advocates in that stakeholder analysis to help with that change?
Yep.
Yeah, I've definitely had great experience with, you know, pilot teams when it was like a whole transformation going, you know, not that they thought they were already doing Agile, but piloting with a couple teams and then having those people become advocates. And it was interesting, you know, often I'd hear people in that original group, you know, the pilot group, who'd say, you know, we're not going to the daily stand-up. That's a stupid idea. You know, that's a waste of our time. And then 6 months later, when everybody's going, wow, your project finished early and, you know, under budget and so successful, they're like, hey, you know, those daily stand-ups are a great thing to do. We really, you know, we communicated, and they become the advocates. So it's, you know, it's great to just let them run with, you know, to try and lead them towards it and have them try it out. But then when it's successful, just let those people within the company who do understand the culture, because they're so much better at relating it. Like, hey, remember we used to do this, and we'd send emails and nobody'd read them. Yeah, we have the daily stand-up now. And I'd be like,
yeah, those are the people with the best stories about why it's not working, right?
yeah, right. And people trust them, right? I mean, they've had that long trust.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, they grew up in the same town kind of feel. So.
Yep.
So Steve, how long do you wait in your uncomfortable silence?
As long as it takes.
Okay.
But you guys,
Balance, right?
I'm ready. I'm here as long as it takes to take questions. But if you and Sue want to wrap things up, that's up to you too.
We're fine. I mean, does anybody else have any questions? Please feel free to ask away.
Or relate your experience from working with difficult changes.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is to make sure that when you're doing your empathy maps and talking to people in the organization, you hit different tiers. You will get a completely different point of view from people who are the rank and file staff versus the folks who are at the top. And some things they think they think they're rewarding people for are not the things that the people who are supposedly being rewarded are thinking.
Yeah, that's why the culture map and those empathy interviews are really important. I often see a lot of really surprised faces when we do the readouts from these assessments, and the executives hear what people think they're supposed to be doing. It's often not what the leaders intended, and so that's a big focus of our executive coaching, is helping people to understand how the things that they say and the behaviors that they demonstrate affect the rest of the people in the organization. You'd be surprised how many people get to really high level leadership positions without realizing the weight and gravity that their actions take on once they're in that position. It's not always something that people realize. It's a great point.
Yeah, I've also had to kind of reach back to the leaders and, have them convey a sense of purpose. Why are we making this change? Because, they've heard a different message for so long, and then just sort of, consultants are in.
Right.
But hearing it from those people within and getting it reinforced, and especially, sometimes you do get the CEO who just read, CIO magazine or whatever he read, Harvard Business Review, Agile is a thing, or we're going to fail.
Right.
But then the middle management folks are like, where do we fit in? We're still, we're still asking for these reports. I thought we still had to, create these daily reports and not just look for results. We don't know what we would do if we're not, nagging people.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, so they need to understand where they fit into the equation and how things might change for them, and sometimes they're not going to be okay with that. That's the other thing. We need to have some empathy for is I haven't worked 20 years to become a manager just so that I can not have any power or authority and I can let my teams be autonomous and self-managing. Right? That's not what I signed up for, and we have to talk to that person differently. Based on that perception, right?
Yeah, absolutely. People get really threatened when their head count disappears. And I've seen some organizations who maintain their org chart just the way it always was, but the way that people work changes. So if that makes people feel better for the time being, okay. But they're still getting a lot more, value, in the work they're doing. So.
I have a question. From your experience, Steve, what is the best way to structure the Agile professionals in the companies? Like when you are going through transformation, for example, in my company, we have like Scrum Master positions. They like RTE roles, like they put like Agile roles at the job titles. And they expect that this should solve the problem. So what are you
Right.
seeing outside, and what do you suggest? I definitely think that people should be like having like more umbrella titles about Agile professionalism, like what they can do, safe they can do, you know, basic Scrum they can do, Kanban, but they are putting into pigeonhole these areas. So what is the right thing to do here?
Yeah, so I think I think there's a couple things there. It sounds like you're talking about, and I want to make sure I understand the question, but it sounds like you're talking a little bit about, you know, situations where we have roles in the organization and have these titles, right, of RTE or Scrum Master, but maybe that's really not the person that's in that role is not right for that role, right? Or is it the idea that you know, if we just rename all of our job titles, that'll fix everything?
Yeah, they think that they're like mutually exclusive. Like being a Scrum Master is really something totally different than being an RT. Like you act at different levels in different frameworks if you're a good like Agile professional. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think I guess my opinion there is just making sure that wherever you're placing people and whatever their titles are, right, that you have someone in that role who understands what they need to do. And it's not just a matter of, let me change your title and that will automatically fill that role and make sure that the objective of that role is being done, right? Making sure that we're putting the right people in those roles with the right personalities and who actually understand how to support the organization from that place.
And I'll throw this out there too. And it goes back, I think, I really liked your point about the focus, being able to focus. People have asked me historically around, you know, waterfall, which I knew very well, and I've been doing this for years, and Agile, which I've been doing now for a few years as well. And they'll say to me, you know, Agile is so much better than waterfall, you know, don't you agree? And I said, the most important thing is that you have capable, competent people that are dedicated to getting their stuff done. And if you can get that either way, you'll have success. And my company and culture is the whole multitasking, multiple projects, changing priorities. That's the problem, right? It doesn't really matter if it's Agile or waterfall, that's the challenge, and being able to navigate that and succeed with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I started in doing Agile Scrum, the training, in fact, that was provided at that time from Scrum Inc., from Jess Sutherland, was that the Scrum Master should be someone on the team, should be somebody contributing to actually getting things done. And then it kind of changed, you know, trying to do these transformations, that you needed a separate person who was just dedicated to trying to make that change. And it's interesting, I haven't heard many people go back, except, you know, the people who I worked with at the time, who still feel like, hey, we understand it. We don't need somebody full-time dedicated to this. And that was kind of my, you know, when I've worked my way out of being a Scrum Master for some teams, I'm like, hey, one of you guys get it. You know, doesn't have to be a full-time thing. If you're paying attention, you know, you understand like some best practices, to use that term, but
right.
You know, what's working for your team and what's not. And, you know, and I think that's where some of the more experienced teams have moved to have somebody within the team be the Scrum Master, and then maybe have a coach who kind of sits in occasionally and says, hey, I see how things are going. You could tweak this and that, you know, an external view. But at the same time, you could have a talent manager, you know, doing that if they had experience. But I think it does help to have somebody on the team who's totally invested, eventually be the Scrum Master when people are really comfortable. That's kind of a, you know, Scrum 2.0 feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think when we first started out with this stuff, it was a lot of small product development teams, and so that worked. And then we started to do enterprise level, Scrum or Agile or Kanban, whatever you want to do. And I think we found, one of the great things about the Scrum Master role in terms of protecting the team and kind of uncovering all the organizational dysfunction, that I think we kind of realized when we started to scale some of these things up was, some of these organizations have so much dysfunction and there's so much integration between teams that yes, you need somebody totally focused on just dealing with the dysfunction in order for the teams to operate, right? And as they do run experiments and change the way that they work and the organization starts to find a better way, the need for that does decrease over time. But I think it's a function of, honestly, like how broken is the process for just communicating between teams and the approvals for getting things done. How broken is that process in the organization? And that kind of tells us usually how much of a need we have for somebody that's just dedicated to doing those kinds of things and supporting the team versus someone on the team being able to take up that role and still be able to contribute.
Yep.
This is awesome. And Rob, I don't want to type because it's going to be really loud on my microphone, but I see your comment there, Rob. Anybody, if you guys want to, again, if you want to talk to me, just hit me up at steven.voyles@the334group.com. But yeah, Express Scripts, that was an interesting, that's an interesting story. So I'd love to talk to you about it, Rob.
Challenges with Zoom. I wasn't able to copy anything out of the chat. I could click on links. So I think we'll work on that for the future.
Okay.
Zoom keeps, iterating. I know, sometimes they had features for good and sometimes they move settings or put them on by default. So.
Well, I'll make sure that I share some of these links with you guys. I don't know if you send emails out to participants or anything like that, but I'll make sure you guys have all the links and emails and all that.
Yeah, we can put things in the LinkedIn group, different places.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. So I thank you, Steve. That was amazing. That was a lot of fun, and I think the audience is very impressed. You've got a lot of compliments coming through.
Well, that's great. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you guys. I hope there was some value in it for you. And again, if there's any follow-up questions or anything I can do to help, please let me know.
Of course. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And just before we depart, our next meeting is February 16th, third Tuesday of the month, as usual. We have Mark Wavel presenting. He is going to talk about the awareness to act to unlock your influence. So we want to learn about the awareness to act skills that you can use to unblock your influence. So please feel free to join us. This will be posted on our YouTube channel. Hopefully I can get it downloaded tomorrow and re-uploaded. This is my first time last month, so we'll try to do it again. And I will send you the link, Steve, directly so you have it.
Great, thank you.
And I think that's about it. So also look for more content on our LinkedIn group and our website at www.agilerhodeisland.com or ri.com, I should say.
Any other
wonderful
openings for jobs?